Hello and welcome to Mac Power Users. My name is Stephen Hackett. I'm joined, as always, by my friend and yours, Mr. David Sparks.
Hey, Stephen. How are you today?
I am good, David. How are you?
I'm still getting over a little bit of my cold, gang, so hang in there with my voice, but I am feeling better. It's just, lingering a bit. That's all.
Yeah. Well, we're here. We're going to talk about some of our workflow stuff. It's going to be a good episode.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this one. But before we get started, Relay for St. Jude is here. Hooray.
Yeah, it is. It is that time again. It is September. When you're listening to this, it's September 1st. MPU actually gets to go first this year, which is fun.
Yeah.
Because September is Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. And this is when we talk about St. Jude. St. Jude cares for some of the world's sickest kids, regardless of their race, ethnicity, beliefs, or ability to pay. These patients at St. Jude receive customized care that they need to treat childhood cancer and other life-threatening diseases, no matter what barriers they may face. And because of its supporters, people like me and you, St. Jude provides children cutting edge treatments not covered by insurance at no cost to families. So think about that for a second. You're in one of the worst situations you can be in as a parent, right? You get this news about your child having cancer or another life-threatening disease, and you're going to get the best treatment available on the whole planet, and they're not going to charge you for it. As someone who was in that situation myself in 2009, I can tell you that it means everything. Families never receive a bill from St. Jude for treatment, travel, housing, or food, so they can focus on helping their child live. So this September, like many Septembers before it, join Relay and St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in recognizing Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, 30 days of honoring those impacted by childhood cancer. So what do? You want to go to stjude.org/relay. stjude.org/relay. It is the first link in the show notes this week. And there you can make a donation and join the other members of the Relay community for the past 6 years who have been doing this. We've been doing this since 2019 officially, and we would love your support again this year to support the life-saving mission of St. Jude. stjude.org/relay has a ton of information on it. You can set up your own campaign. You can get rewards. Lots of great stuff there. You're also finding out about employee matching, which is huge. So if you work for a company and they're big enough, chances are they will match your donation in some way. So there's some information about that at stjude.org/relay, but reach out to somebody in your company. Usually the paperwork is trivial and it makes your money go even further, which is just totally awesome.
Yeah, you double your money. We got that last year. Daisy is working for Disney. She got a full-time job last year. And by making the contribution through Disney, because I think we made like an $800 donation. We made a $1,600 donation. I mean, you can double your money just
it's
by
so
doing
good.
That. Yeah.
By filling out a form. Sometimes they will fill the form out for you in HR or whatever.
And they're happy to do it. Like these big employers want to do this. So definitely get on that. One thing I want to add to this, Stephen, is at the Relay event, the St. Jude people sought me out and they said, we wanted to meet you because the MPU audience is so generous every year. We wanted to thank you. And I'm like, well, you're thanking the wrong person. You want to thank the audience. So I'm thanking the audience on behalf of St. Jude. Every year, the MPU audience crushes it. And there's a little bit of vanity when I say, gang, let's crush it again. Let's just do this.
Let's do it. Because here's the truth. Every child deserves to live their best life and celebrate every moment free from fear of cancer and other catastrophic diseases. So go to stjude.org/relay to donate or create your campaign today. And if you have any questions about this or any concerns, send us an email. Find us in Relay Members Discord. There's a St. Jude support channel if you have ideas for your own fundraiser. This is a community effort. It takes all of us. And so thank you for joining us once again.
Yeah, I'm tired of hearing the stories how nerds are, insensitive and jerks. And, there's a whole thing out there how people who are nerdy like us are not nice people. But, the MPU audience disproves that every year with St. Jude. And Stephen, I know that you work really hard on this, and I just want to acknowledge that because from behind the scenes, I see all the things you're doing. So we
Thank
won't
you.
say anything more about it today, but you'll be hearing about it for the next month on the show. And really, I encourage you to think about it and think of all the dumb stuff you spend money on, and just realize that you could give some money to people who cure kids with cancer. That's all. Today on More Power Users, we're doing the iPhone 15 Pro Max exit interview. This will be fun.
Yeah, it is a new iPhone season, and we're going to talk about the outgoing iPhone. Should be good.
Yeah, exactly. And to get more power users, you sign up over at relay.fm/MPU. You get the ad-free extended version of the show, and you really help us keep the lights on. We appreciate that. So check it out. But today we have a topic that is just something I kind of wanted to do because my workflows have all been in chaos over the last year or two. Part of it is the transition to being just MacSparky. Part of it is development in underlying technologies that allowed me to change a lot of the workflows. And part of it is me bringing on my good friend JF as a person who helps me get things shipped. So now I have to collaborate. There's AI in the mix. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on. So we said, well, let's just do a check-in on what we're doing with our workflows.
Yeah, you when you added this to our big table of topics, I was instantly in love with it because I also have had changes. Right, the team at Relay continues to grow. I joined Underscore's company to help him with his apps and his business. That's been 8 or 9 months now, and so I've also had changes. And it's September is a busy time of year for the St. Jude thing, for new iPhones. Seemed like a great time to sort of sit down and talk about this. And we're going to talk about tools, but also kind of the why behind those tools. Because when you do work by yourself and then you graduate to having a team, or that team changes, or what you're outputting changes, right? Your actual production changes. It's an opportunity to reevaluate what you're using. And sometimes I've definitely found this to be true over the years. A tool or workflow that I rely on for a long time suddenly doesn't fit the bill anymore. And maybe it needs to be tweaked or changed, or maybe I need to move on to something else. And so that's what we're going to get into this week.
Yeah. And for me, it feels like it's settling now. So that's another reason why I wanted to do it now. In general, I only change major tools around the new year, but the workflows can adjust. And I've definitely been doing that as kind of needs arise. One other thing I want to put on kind of a disclaimer when we do these shows like this, these workflow shows, everybody always inevitably writes in and say, well, you didn't talk about tool, XYZ that I like to use for this. And I get that. We're just going to be talking about the ones that we've chosen. There are so many tools now. There's no way for us to do an encyclopedic episode of every available tool for everything we're doing. But these are the ones that we've chosen. And if you've got one that you love, we've got the forums. You can weigh in there and let us know what you're thinking. But it is an interesting time because we've got collaborative and singular work, and both of us are doing a bunch of different things, and we've kind of developed and redeveloped our workflows around that.
Yeah, for a long time, there were great tools out there, either on the Mac or online. But it's when you added the collaboration part where a lot of those things fell down. And I
Yeah.
really do feel like we're in this era now, and I'm sure it's because of work from home and remote work and those sorts of things, where there's a lot of great options for collaboration across distances. And I really feel like a bunch of these tools that we have talked about over the years, some of them have added collaboration, right? Or kind of shoehorned it in. I know we've talked a lot over the years about Apple doing that and things like Notes and, Pages and Keynote and that sort of thing. But then there's also this whole new class of communications and collaboration tools. And we're going to touch on what works for us.
Yeah. And it's interesting to me, because I really resisted getting help. Part of that is just me being a control freak, but also I liked my tools and I didn't want to change them, and things that work when you're doing singular work aren't necessarily, the thing when you start collaborating. And in general, my experience was collaborative tools were subpar. I mean, they weren't as good as the singular tools. So I really resisted getting help partly because of this, but I've been on a journey, gang, and I want to share that. This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by Squarespace. Go to squarespace.com/MPU to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain using the code MPU. Squarespace is the all-in-one website platform for entrepreneurs to stand out and succeed online. Whether you're just starting out or managing a growing brand, you can stand out with a beautiful website, engage with your audience, and sell anything, your products, services, and even the content you create. Squarespace has got everything you need, all in one place, all on your terms. You can start a completely personalized website with their guided design system, Squarespace Blueprint. Choose from professionally curated layout and styling options to build a unique online presence from the ground up, tailored to your brand or business and optimized for every device. And then easily launch your website and get discovered fast with integrated, optimized SEO tools so you show up more often to more people and grow the way you want. You can also integrate flexible payments to make checkout seamless for your customers with simple but powerful payment tools. Accept credit cards, PayPal, and Apple Pay, and in eligible countries offer customers the option to buy now and pay later with Afterpay and ClearPay. And with Squarespace, you can make the most of AI, kickstart or update written content on any website, product description, or email with Squarespace AI, generating instant personalized results that know and show your brand identity. Explain what your site is about, choose your tone, and enter what you need to get short or long form text. No matter the placement, Squarespace AI makes it easier to go live, stand out, and succeed online. I've been using Squarespace since they first launched. I still have a Squarespace website, and I just love the way that the company continues to evolve the product and bring its users the best possible experience to build and maintain a beautiful website online. If you're thinking about going online, Squarespace is the place to start. So head to squarespace.com and sign up for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/MPU to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. That URL one more time, squarespace.com/MPU. And when you decide to sign up, get 10% off your first purchase and show your support for the Mac Power users. Our thanks to Squarespace for their support of the Mac Power users and all of Relay FM.
Yeah, so David, let's talk about what you're doing. So you are doing a bunch of content stuff, right? You've got not only the website, but your shows and the labs. Kind of walk us through that and some of the tools that are behind those things.
Yeah, I started, I made a freeform document with all the different types of content I make and then tried to like workflow each one. And so there's blog posts, the newsletter, the MacSparky newsletter. By the way, I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes. If you'd like to sign up, I'd really appreciate it. That's something that's really important to me. And I do put original content into that the MacSparky newsletter. And then the labs stuff, and the labs has different levels. So there's, almost everyday content going out to somebody in the labs. And then the field guides, which are kind of the big thing I do. And the podcasts, 3 podcasts. So I actually have a lot on my plate. And one of the mistakes I made as I started to transition to doing more collaborative work was say, okay, well, I need the collaborative tool to make blog posts because just to kind of cut to the end a bit, I write a blog post, but at the very end, JF proofs it and posts it to WordPress. He's the last person to see it. And I find that having one more pair of eyes look at it sometimes catches things that would make me look stupid. So that's cool. But the mistake I made, I think, for this journey was saying, well, if he's going to be posting it, then he needs to be involved throughout the process. And I need to have, everything done. And I eventually realized, no, that's not really true. A lot of the stuff remains personal projects until the last mile. And then once I realized that, and that was one of the advantages of laying it out in the freeform doc, it's like, oh yeah, what I did was I made a box of each step, like for a blog post, first you capture the idea of the post, then you do the research, then you do the writing, then you do the initial proofread, then you do a second proofread, and then you prepare it for the website, and then you post it. Well, I colored the boxes by what each person is doing. And I noticed that the JF colored boxes are always at the very bottom. And I realized, oh, wait a second, I don't need to have like a big fancy system for this with him. He just needs that. We just need a system that works at the end when he needs to post it. And maybe that's obvious to people listening, but maybe it's not. And hopefully that insight helps you as you start to juggle between singular and collaborative work. But I've really tried to now think about at what point does the handoff occur and what's the tool for the handoff given that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, it makes sense to me. I think knowing where those transitions are is really important, and recognizing that over time they can change.
Yeah, exactly. And so then there is one type of content that I do routinely, which I'm just going to call kind of writing. It's often blog posts, newsletter posts, and newsletters I write for the labs. That's where I send something out I wrote. And that really is the foundation of what I do as MacSparky. That's the very first thing I did when I started being MacSparky. So I'm very proud of it and something I want to continue to do. I like the form of writing. I think that the process of writing often allows me to refine my own thinking on something and kind of go further with an idea. I talked about this in the productivity field guide. Like, you have to write down your roles in your Arete because just carrying around your head's enough. The process of reducing it to a writing makes it real for you. And I think that's true with a lot of the ideas I develop as MacSparky. So this is the workflow. The first thing you do is you have to have ideas, right? And there's no problem for that here. I have so many ideas, So what I did was I've made a shortcuts, and it's called content ideas. And it what it does is it creates OmniFocus entries. I've got OmniFocus projects for content ideas for the different platforms: blog, newsletter, labs, videos, etc. So I have the shortcut runs and says, "What's the idea?" And then it prompts me to say, "Well, is there something attached to it?" And it'll look like if I have a URL in the clipboard, or if I'm doing this off a web page or something. So it will try and capture the initial source of the idea for me. And it says, where's this go? And I can say, this is a blog post, this is a newsletter, or this is a decide later kind of thing where I'm interested in this. I'm not sure what this actually is going to be, but I still capture it. And so I have that. That's probably my most frequently run shortcut because I'm always coming up with ideas. I can run it off my phone, my Mac, my iPad. And when a random idea comes to me, I mean, often the ideas aren't related to anything I've read. It's just like something that's been percolating in the back of my mind. And then, off I go. And I capture it into this list. So I've got this list constantly, and I don't really judge them. I just kind of let them go. And then I have blocks of time where I say, okay, I'm going to work on the blog for 2 hours. Well, that always starts with a trip into the ideas list, and I look through what I've captured. And when I go through that, I may say, well, that was a dumb idea, and I'll delete it. But I'll say, oh, that's a good one. There's a good one. I want to do a blog post on that. I think that's interesting, And so at that point, I check it off in OmniFocus, and then I start the production of it, and it starts with, usually research, which I primarily do in Safari. I mean, Safari is a great place to go do that, or whatever your web browser of choice. But at some point I get to a point where I want to rough draft something. And it depends on the size of it. Like for a lot of blog posts, once I've thought through it, I know what I want to say. Then I use my Whisper Memos workflow. And we've talked about this in the show prior, but I'm going to say it again for anybody that missed it, because I think it's just so useful. Whisper Memos is an app I subscribe to. Full disclosure, they sponsored the blog at some point. I don't remember when, but they haven't done that in a long time. But what it does is it's using the Whisper AI technology, and you open it and you press a button on your phone. Or in my case, I've programmed the action button on my Apple Watch Ultra, the big orange button. I just press that once and I just start talking. And so you don't actually see it transcribe for you. It just records your voice, which I find really beneficial because I don't get hung up on checking the transcription. I just talk. And I just do a rough draft of whatever it is. And a couple things Whisper Memos is good at. One thing is you can tell it unique words. So rather than writing Max Sparky, Maxbarkey, it says Max Sparky. It gets some of the custom words right. And then it also has the ability to send the output to a custom email address. And the Drafts app has an email inbox in essence. It's got a special magic address you get when you pay for Drafts. And so I put the Drafts email into Whisper Memos. So the workflow is when I'm ready to start getting these rough drafts in, I just push the button on my watch, I dictate the rough post, and then a minute or two later, it's in Drafts. And there's no action by me at all, which is really nice.
Yeah, it's interesting how we differ here, where my writing process is, I have a list of ideas, right? And if I just have some time to write and don't have anything top of mind, I will go there. But most of my writing is okay, I'm writing against a news story or, some anniversary of some old computer thing that only I care about or things like that, where there's kind of a date already associated with it. But I think where we really differ is the research and draft stages, especially my computer history writing. I'm in Safari, but I'm also in DevonThink and I have 4,000 tabs open and it's very messy. And I'm not an outliner. I told the story recently to somebody, but in college, I had some class where I had to write a paper, but the week before it was due, I had to submit an outline. Well, to do that, I just wrote the paper and then reverse engineered the outline because I outline for podcasts, but writing is a different process in my mind for whatever reason. And so for me, there's not the research outline, rough draft, finished draft is a very messy back and forth situation.
Yeah, but you write a different style than I do.
Yeah.
And your stuff is more time sensitive. Most of the stuff I write isn't that tied to time or news. I do have a variation of this when it's a more complicated thing. A lot of newsletter posts are longer and more thoughtful, frankly. So in those, I'll open up a mind node and just kind of fiddle with it for a week or two. And this is an old idea in Mac Power Users, but I call it cooking ideas. You get an idea started, and MindNode is really good at this. You just go into it every day for 5 or 10 minutes, and I feel like your subconscious mind does the heavy lift for you. And if you just give it enough time, at some point you get to the point where oh yeah, that outlines about where I want it, and then I will dictate the original draft looking at the outline. But it depends. If it's a 2 or 3 paragraph blog post, I don't need to do that. So it just it's kind of relevant. But ultimately, I do that first dictation entry. And as a result, if you read the stuff I write, it always sounds very conversational. And I think that's just because usually that first draft starts from my voice, not from my fingers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also a result of practicing law 30 years, because that's the way you did it. You were taught as a young lawyer to dictate everything. It was faster. And back in the old days, they had somebody in the office that would type it for you. And so, I just kind of grew up that way. So I'm very comfortable with it. And I just happen to live in an era where the technology is caught up to make this just really easy. I'll have, I usually try to write blog posts about a week in advance of them posting. And so I've always got ideas I'm generating. And in a 2 or 3 hour block, I can usually write blog posts for an entire week if I've done the research, And it's just really easy that way. So sends them to drafts. Newsletters take longer, all this stuff. Some of the stuff takes longer, just depending on what it is, but it's a very simple workflow. And I use it, honestly, I use that workflow for a lot of things. I go through email, for instance. This is totally unrelated, but I'll go through email and I'll blast through the easy ones. And the harder ones, there's also 4 or 5 harder ones. I'll use Whisper Memos again and dictate all the responses to them, and then go in and paste them in and send them. So then the actual writing part gets done in drafts because it's in drafts. And what I've done in drafts is use the workspaces feature. They've got a thing in there where you can kind of combine tags to have it give you selected views. And the key tags for me are active plus whatever the media is. Like in the case of a blog post, it would be active plus blog or active plus newsletter. And I've got all these views that show me, all of the stuff I've got in there. And this is stuff that JF isn't aware of. The people that I work with have no idea. This is stuff I'm laboring on as a solo artist, right? And I have stuff in there just for so many different things. Like, the next edition of Productivity Field Guide, I've got 5 or 6 essays in there I want to include that I've been kind of, keen on. And now that I've done the dictation, then it all goes into keyboard and me going through and editing it and proofreading it and taking things out and, just constantly going through and refining it and getting the words the way I want them. But I've been using drafts for that. And it's been really good. Greg does a great job on always keeping the most recent feature in drafts. I can talk later about some alternative tools that I've thought about, but drafts just makes it so easy. And the whisper memos to drafts, function where it just shows up there is really nice. But it's not just there. You can capture into drafts from pretty much anywhere. And you can even use your voice directly into drafts, and it's on all platforms and super stable. I like that he's made it very customizable, so I can put the fonts and colors that please me when I use it.
Mm-hmm.
And I do a lot of work there in that workflow in drafts of fixing the words.
Yeah. I think another difference between you and me is you, from knowing you and hearing this, you have a lot more writing projects in flight at a single time, where other than Performer Month, which just ended, I generally don't. Like I may be working on the 512 members newsletter or, something for the Relay newsletter kind of in the background, but it's rare that I have multiple blog posts kind of going at once. And I don't have anything like the field guide, right, where you're doing a lot of writing and doing it over a period of time. And so that's the difference between us, but it's also a difference in tooling, right? Drafts is really great for that. And with your tagging, you can move, like you said, in between these mediums or these projects. For someone like me who doesn't really work that way, something like IA Writer or just writing directly in MarsEdit, which is what I use to publish to 512 Pixels, that works fine. It's more document based. It's less flexible, but it fits what I need. So I think looking at the breadth of projects at once is another factor in choosing the right tool.
Yeah, like looking right now, I have 21 writing things marked as active, and like I'm looking at the one at the top of the list. It's a newsletter I'm going to publish in 2 weeks, and then there's some blog posts, and there's a bunch of stuff for Productivity Field Guide that I want to address in the next edition. So there's just a whole bunch of stuff here. And some of these are, thousands of words long, and some of them are a few paragraphs. But I can go in here using the workspaces feature to get, to drill it down. And I talk about this more in the Focus podcast, but I've really come to rely on block scheduling more than task lists to get my work done. So like I have figured out that about 3 hours a week is what I need to put into the blog. So I've got a couple, 1.5 hour blocks, and I'll just go into drafts and go to the work, to the workflow that shows me just active blog posts, get those done, and then get them onto the next steps that I'll describe in a minute. But before I do, I wanted to talk about alternatives here. And I know I said at the beginning of the show I wasn't going to do this, but this always comes up, right? Apple Notes. Why don't you just do it in Apple Notes? Actually, Apple Notes is a really good option for this because it's ultimately rich text, which is what I actually post into rich text into WordPress because I just find it easier than posting Markdown in because that's the format it's kind of looking for. It looks good on Vision Pro. And I know Drafts isn't quite there yet. I know he's working on it, but I can't wait until Drafts is native in Vision Pro because I do a lot of the edits and writing in Vision Pro. And it's also everywhere and it syncs good, but I prefer Drafts, so that's just a personal preference. It's partly because of the way I can filter so easily, but I could absolutely recreate this entire workflow with Apple Notes and tags and a couple bits, but for whatever reason, I like Drafts. And the other thing is I like the way Drafts can send stuff elsewhere because not only do I put like partial blog posts in there, even just like ideas in there. Like I hear somebody with an idea that relates to the business, or an idea that relates to a personal life or something I want to pursue, that little orange button on my watch that allows me to say words and have them just show up on my computer, I find that very useful in a lot of contexts. So Notes isn't as friendly as Drafts is for that. The other one is IA Writer, which you talked about, and it's so pretty, and it is a great writing tool, but it doesn't handle multiple writing projects the way Drafts does.
Yeah.
Which is kind of describes the difference between us. And then like Ulysses just came out with an update and it looks good and it's tempting to me. It's pretty. But I'm not allowed to change apps midstream. And I'm not even sure I would change apps, but towards the end of the year, I'm going to take another look at Ulysses because they've done a lot of work over there. It's just probably not for me. It just Drafts is so frictionless for this process that I can't imagine I'll move off of it. And then the other one is Obsidian. Obsidian is where I do a lot of thinking, but it's not where I like write final product because like one of the ways I like to write some days is I go outside or go, to Disneyland and bring an iPad, and all those words are in Drafts. I can open them immediately, get into them. It's native app everywhere. And it's just so great for that. I mean, the only one of these that I would really consider as a replacement would be Notes. But I'm just not quite there yet. And I do kind of like Drafts better.
If Notes offered Markdown support, which I think we talked about in our Notes episode, if it had Markdown support, it would maybe be the Omnivore app for writing for me. But because I publish in and basically anything I publish is in Markdown, right? The newsletters, I do in Markdown, and then I copy like the rich text out of that into Memberful. But 512 Pixels, everything is published in Markdown. The Relay CMS fully supports Markdown. And so for me, that's like pretty high on the list. Like if you're not a good Markdown editor, I'm not gonna spend time looking at you. That's one reason years ago I sort of gave up on the idea of Ulysses because, and I don't know how it is today. I haven't tried it in a long time, but it used to be they did weird stuff with Markdown around links and images. I was like, well, no, this is so critical. It's so core to how I work and honestly think. Like even in my paper notebooks, I tend to write in Markdown with like, for headers and stuff.
Yeah,
it's got to work. And so for me, that is a top tier priority.
Yeah, I call that analog Markdown, and I am also guilty of doing it on occasion. But Drafts does that, and I write in Markdown. But I guess I should go to this next step. I'm going to stray off the outline a little bit, Stephen. So what happens with this stuff once I've got it to a point where like, okay, I'm happy with it now. I want to do something with it. I do run it through Grammarly. So that's a key tool in my system. One of the big questions of Apple AI is, will their grammar checker allow me to replace Grammarly? I like that idea because I don't really relish the idea of sending everything I write to a website. I don't really like the fact that they get all that stuff. But I do find that the feedback is useful. And I probably adopt in the neighborhood of about 30% of it. I don't just accept everything they offer. I think a lot of the stuff they do kind of kills my voice.
Yes.
And I want my writing to reflect my voice. But they also occasionally offer a rewording that makes sense to me, in addition to finding silly grammar errors. So I get to this point where I'm like, okay, this thing is ready for the world. What do I do? This is where I get collaborative. And it won't be a mystery to listeners to know that I've moved all this stuff into Notion. That was not an easy move. I mean, we did a show on Notion. I generally am against Notion. I feel like it's an ugly web app and it's not a native player on the Mac. And generally, like something like Craft is so much more appealing to me because they're really truly an Apple Mac application. But Notion is just so damn good at what it does, right? And it really works so well. So I get a pile of words done, whether it's going to be a future newsletter or a blog post or whatever. And this is where JF gets involved. Him and I have worked out the workflows of how do I give you a pile of words and maybe pictures, and then it shows up somewhere on the internet. And he's very good at like managing the website and getting the blog posts up or getting the newsletter formatted with the newsletter company. So the idea is I get to be the creator. Once it's done, I hand it off to him, and he goes through and he takes it from there. So it goes into Notion. It's created as a new record, and we have a lot of metadata and tags related, like, which platform is this? Is it a public blog, or is it a MacroSparky Labs post, or is it, there's all these different things that can happen, and who's the audience for it? Like if it goes into MacroSparky Labs, does it go to just the level 1, or does it go to level 1, 2, 3? So all that stuff has been handled. And the most important field really is the status field, because I mark it as ready for edit. And then he's got a custom view on his side where then it just pops up on his radar. Sparky's given me something. Mm-hmm. And then he goes through and he does a proofread on it. And we are very dear friends, and we trust each other. And so if he catches like a tense error or something like grammar, I said, don't bother me with that. Just fix it, and put it up. If he sees something where he's like, are you sure you're right about this? Or like, he'll check my work in essence, If it's substantive, he'll let me know. If it's just small, he'll just fix it. But then he puts it into the content system, because we use WordPress for MacSparky, or we use ConvertKit for the newsletter. So he'll put it into the whole system. With a blog post, that's the end of my involvement. It just shows up one day on the blog.
Yeah, it just comes out the other side.
Yeah, I don't, and it's kind of nice. This is the first time that's ever happened for me, because I was always into the weeds. Get the tags, get the but now that just happens, which allows me to go back to focusing on making stuff, which is kind of the reason I'm paying them. The newsletter goes out to like 24,000 people, so I don't want it to go out without me seeing it one last time. Yeah. That's just me being anal, but it's it's a big deal. And
it is. That's a lot of humans, man.
Yeah, exactly. So, but he does most of the work, and then I go through and check it at the end. With the Labs newsletter stuff, he just ships it, and he knows what he's doing. So that's the system is, and that was kind of my discovery in this process is I didn't need to have a collaborative thing where JF sees everything I'm working on. And we don't need to have in the Notion database a list of 30 pending blog posts. The only thing that goes into Notion is the stuff that's ready to ship. And the other stuff is on my plate until it's ready to ship, and because it's a small team, we're able to get away with it. If you're a bigger team, I can see why you would need more. But I think when you're exploring collaborative tools, think about that, how much stuff really needs to be collaborative, and at what point does it need to be collaborative? Mm-hmm. And this whole workflow did not happen overnight. It's evolved, and I've gone down, wrong turns, but I feel like it's kind of settled now in a way where me getting words out to the world happens with peak efficiency, but also giving me the time to be the fiddly writer who wants to think about words for a long time until it's ready.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is an area that I don't have something like this on my side, right? So I write, edit, sometimes to less successful degrees than others, and then publish my own writing on 512, right? I don't have anybody helping me there. On the newsletter stuff, like for the Relay newsletter, that's the closest I have, I think, to your workflow, where Kathy Campbell and Kathy's the community manager at Relay, she and I will write the content for the newsletter. We just each have our own sections. And then I will compile it and edit it. And then we send it to Mike Hurley and to me as like a test email to read it. And there's something, I mentioned that part because it's important to me, and I want to know if it's important to you. I do a much better job proofing something if I'm reading it in a different context than I wrote it. And so in Mars Edit, I did all the work to like make 512 Pixels theme work in Mars Edit, so I can see a preview of what it would look like on the web. I send myself a test email so I can read it in my mail app. And for something about that, just gives me a different view onto it, and I'm more likely to find errors. Is that true for you, or was it true for you before JF took the publishing and editing over?
Absolutely. I think it's a human nature thing. Like even as a lawyer, I had a workflow where I would really important, because sometimes you send a letter that like lawsuits can be based on if you're not careful. I would like even just print it out as plain text in like a monospace font. I would do all these tricks to my brain to read it with a different view, and especially because you send it through Grammarly, sometimes Grammarly fixes things. Sometimes the Grammarly changes it just enough to blow it. So you've got to like go back and read it really carefully after you do the Grammarly review. So all that stuff I think is super important. And like I said, printed it out, sending me. I do the same thing with my newsletters. I send them to myself and JF. Sometimes if it's a big one, I'll send it to my wife too to read. Just like I really want to like get it right. And as a small team or a 1-person team or, just a 2 or 3-person team, it's really easy to make a mistake there. So you have to be super careful.
Yeah, I guess it is pretty human nature. I remember in high school and college at like the newspaper, sometimes people would only find things after it was printed and on the newsstand. It's like, well, I can't fix that. But, it was the same reason that when I would lay out a news page, I would print it, on our big, very fancy HP printer, and the copy editor and the managing editor, we would read over it all on printouts instead of on screen because we've been looking at it on screen all day.
Yeah, totally. And like, I think part of it, at least for myself, is I read what I intended to write, not necessarily what I wrote.
Dude, yes. Yes.
And so like, I know what that's supposed to say. So when there's a typo or an extra word or something, my brain doesn't catch it because my brain's like, oh, no, this is good because this is what you meant to say. And it's like, whoops. Yeah, it still happens. I still make typos. They're much fewer now than they were back, 15 years ago at MacSparky, because then I was like, I was just racing. I was like in between court appearances, like get it done and post it and get on. Now I can be more intentional with it, and I have another person. But even now, I still make mistakes, and it just happens. So it's okay.
Human. It's human. Yeah. And while we talk about typos, you and I both have the experience writing online for big audiences where people will alert us of typos.
Yeah.
And 9 times out of 10, that comes with an apology attached. Like, oh, hey, I'm sorry. I found this. Thank you for sending them in. Like
exactly.
We didn't catch it. We want to be accurate and correct. And there's nothing worse. And I'm sure you've had this experience too, where you come across a blog post from like 8 years ago and there's a typo in it. You're like, that's been on the internet for almost a decade and no one told, like it's the worst feeling. So thank you for sending those in.
Well, the funny thing for me is because a lot of the MacSparky content is intentionally timeless. It's more about, the intersection of productivity and Apple technology than it is about what, Steve Jobs thinks. So people send me notes about 10-year-old posts saying, hey, I was reading this post and I noticed there's a typo, and it's a 10-year-old post, but it's still relevant. And somehow the internet pointed this person at this thing. We absolutely go back and fix it, whenever that's identified. I want it to be like right. But it's hard. And, but I think it's in a lot of ways easier now than ever for me because of Grammarly, which I just continue to think that is just, I always thought grammar checkers were kind of terrible, and Grammarly really is the exception. And I gladly pay my annual fee for it. But, as I keep saying, boy, I hope Apple gets it right with that. But yeah, because you've got these AI grammar checkers, which are actually useful. And then I've got another human involved now. So hopefully there's a lot fewer of them. But that's the workflow for getting words out. And so as you see, it's a very solitary experience until the very end. And then it's collaborative, essentially for a handoff. It's not really that collaborative, The only thing that's really collaborative is the newsletter where Jeff would say, okay, I've got it up. Now you can go check it, But the blog posts and the labs kind of blog posts just go. And I love that.
This episode of Mac Power Users is brought to you by SaneBox. SaneBox learns what email is important to you and it filters out what isn't, saving you hours. And the best part of this is it works with all kinds of email programs and services. You don't have to use a special app. So me personally, I use SaneBox against 3 different Google accounts. One Gmail, a couple of Google Workspace accounts. I'm using Mail on the iPhone and MindStream on the Mac, and SaneBox is with me everywhere. So what does that get me? What does SaneBox do? Well, SaneBox unlocks great email filtering. Here are a couple of examples. some of that filtering. You have Sane Later. Keep your inbox clean with what only really matters. So stuff that you don't need to see right now, stuff that can be dealt with later, stays in Sane Later waiting for you. Then there's the Sane Black Hole. Drag a message into this folder and you basically are unsubscribing with just one click. You can snooze messages. You can have newsletters go to Sane News. You can set up reminders. You can deep clean, which lets SaneBox go through your email and get rid of old stuff. You can move attachments to cloud storage. It's awesome. I honestly could not live with my email without SaneBox. There's a bunch of different pricing plans available. They start as low as about $4 a month, and there's a 14-day free trial. You need to go check that out because I'm telling you, after 2 weeks, you're not going to want to live without SaneBox. And in fact, 2/3 of MPU listeners who try SaneBox end up subscribing. So go to sanebox.com/MPU. That's SaneBox, SANEBOX, sanebox.com/MPU to receive $25 worth of credit on any plan. So go check it out and bring sanity to your inbox. Sign up today for a free 2-week trial at sanebox.com/MPU.
All right. So we've talked about writing. What about the more media types of production you and I do? You want to talk about podcasts?
Yeah, absolutely. And for both of us, these are extremely collaborative efforts, right? You and your shows and me and my shows, we work with other people, right? We have our hosts, we have our editor, Jim Metzendorf, who's editing this right now. Thank you, Jim, for making us sound good every week. Podcasts, at least podcasts, the way that we do them at Relay, extremely collaborative. And I know for MPU and for Connected, and I think your other shows as well, Notion has become the hub for the shows. And so for MPU, we have this big table of all of our upcoming episodes. It's down through the end of the year, which I remarked earlier to you on a private call, like, oh, the end of the year is not that far away, really.
Yeah.
And we have, the topics that we want to do those weeks, the status of those, like, oh, this is scheduled. Like, we're going to interview this person on October 21st. It's a lock, and a bunch of other metadata about the episode, right? Kind of the whoever's leading it. Because sometimes, like this one, for instance, you took the lead on, and some of them we do it jointly. Sometimes it's me. It just kind of depends on the topic and what we have going on. But Notion lets us each manage all that metadata and then drill into an individual episode and work on the outline. A show like MPU, it's not scripted, right? We have an outline, and the way I've described it to people is they're like the flags down the side of a mountain, right? We're skiing down a mountain and we want to hit the flags, but what we do in between them is kind of up to us. And we want to go with the flow and change things as the conversation ebbs and flows. And so you and I will both work on an outline, right? We have our headers and we put things in and links and, things we want to talk about. Sometimes it's a single word. Other times, I think you and I both do this. We will write a sentence or two because we want to get something across exactly the way that we wrote it, right? It's important for me to say this exactly the way I think about it. And we will chip away on that on the case of MPU over the course of several weeks. Now, Connected, it's a weekly news show. We're in the outline Monday and Tuesday. We're recording on Wednesday, so it's a much faster cycle. But it's the same workflow. It's collaborative editing and note-taking and putting this outline together and moving things around.
Yeah, and this has been an evolution for me as well because I've got all my shows now in Notion. And in addition to 2 co-hosts and an editor, all 3 of my shows occasionally have guests, and the guests need to get into it too. I mean, we've got a show next week with a guest. The guest already has access to next week's outline, and that stuff is something we're always working on. But to me, it really has been such an evolution in terms of podcast planning, but it's also been kind of an evolution of the way I think about task management. Mm-hmm. I've really been trying to think of task managers more as lists now, like a list of lists. And the problem with task managers, and anybody that went through the OmniFocus Field Guide will have heard this already, but it's very easy to turn a task manager into a task master. because you build it out and you've got these looks that give you all these tasks, and you look at it every day as this burden to carry on your back. And it really should be, the things you write down on these lists should be opportunities to pursue. They're not really things that you must do, right? And finding a way to have a healthy relationship with these lists. And for me, the way that's evolved is turning into, again, time blocking as key. Like, I have a set amount of time for Mac Power users every week. I've got a 2-hour block I do at the end of the week where I try to prep for next week. And then I've got an hour block before we record. So I've got these different blocks throughout the week. And so I have really kind of fallen away from my old practice of having very complicated OmniFocus projects tracking what needs to be done on each and every episode.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, it's about just like giving myself adequate time to do the work. And if you go into the Notion outline, there's a part in there that shows who's doing what ad and whether it's been recorded or not. So when I have that block, I may record the ad and check it off. And then, the other things we do is I like to send thank you notes to guests. It's not in the system so much, but when I do the block, I always check to see if I've done that. And I work on the outline and research the outline in Notion. So it's been more of a thing where I go to the work rather than actively track a bunch of tasks on it. And I've been doing this for about 6 months as an experiment. And Stephen knows because he sees like sometimes tasks show up in the outline and stuff that are just for me. And at one point I was doing it with metadata. But I haven't really talked to you about this, Stephen. But, do you notice a difference in my effectiveness? And one of my concerns is by not having OmniFocus yell at me to do the ads and by missing doing the ads, I really haven't felt like it's affected my performance. But I think it's a healthier way to go about like managing the work.
Yeah, I think it's gone really well. I mean, I'm not, out there chasing you with a stick for the ad reads very often. And the nice thing about them being in Notion is I don't have to go dig through our shared Dropbox to like, oh, are they uploaded? Are they done? Like, we both use that system where we just check it off because the ad reads themselves are collaborative, right? Whoever does the first pass on the outline generally assigns who's going to read what, or sometimes there's reasons for that aren't interesting. And we make sure that they're all there, and what I like about this system is that it also serves as the way we interact with Jim, our editor, right? So I'm taking edit notes as we go. I've got a shortcut that does it and go into a text file, and I copy that into the bottom of the Notion. And so when we're done, we hang up the phone, we upload our files. I ping Jim in Slack and say, hey, this episode is uploaded. All the files are there. All the ads are there. Here's the URL to the Notion. He's in here, but I sent him the link, and he can see all in one place. He can see our outline. He can see my edit notes. He can see that the ads are done, and it becomes really like a one sheet. Like, this is everything that has to do with this episode, and it is extremely helpful in a show like MPU to have all of that, I think, in one place because we have multiple outlines moving at once, because we're working on more than one thing at once. The previous system we had in Google Drive it got the job done for a long, long time, right? But there was a lot of back and forth. There was a lot of jumping around between different spreadsheets and this Google Doc and that Google Doc and this thing over here. And with Notion, because basically everything's a database in Notion, you can just link out to something and be there in just a single click. And I find that to be really efficient.
I agree. And like this, where the blog stuff and the writing stuff for me was something where it was solitary till the very end. These podcast episodes are collaborative from the original inception. We have also in here a list of ideas for future shows. And Stephen and I usually get on the phone a half hour before every episode to talk about the future of the show. So like, this is working for me. And the interesting development for me is that I never thought I would abandon the OmniFocus project management element of this stuff. But you might know I didn't talk about that in the last segment either, because once I pull the idea out of the OmniFocus list, everything is just managed by its existence in drafts until it gets put in Notion, and it's managed by its existence in Notion. And I've really simplified the process so I have less administrative overhead, which makes my life easier. And again, for me, the blocks are the key. Like I have a list for my week of what blocks I want to do on each day. And if I miss them, that's a problem. So I'm very careful about it. But it's much easier to manage a list of, 10 blocks than it is to manage 100 tasks.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And with something that's repetitive, like a podcast, right, where you're doing, okay, like each week I've got to do the ads, each week I've got to do this and that. Like there's something to be said about moving that out of your to-do list or
Yeah.
having it someplace else, having it in the shared document or whatever it may be. And just because something is a task or is a piece of writing, like it doesn't have to live with all of your other tasks or writing, right? There can be flexibility there.
Yeah. So podcasts to me, very collaborative, and across all three of my shows, it works basically the same. And Notion, as much as I complain about it, is an ideal tool for this.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And in terms of publishing, like I know for my shows at least, they get edited from Jim. I get notification in Slack that they're done. And then for MPU and Connected, I upload, I make sure everything in our CMS is correct, and then I publish, right? That is something that I'm doing myself each and every week. And generally that's solo, right? Sometimes I will, if I get stuck writing a description or, putting the links together or something, I'll ask a co-host for help. But generally I take care of the post-production stuff. And, our CMS is custom written for Relay. We've been developing it for over 10 years now, and it is the perfect podcast production tool, or at least the closest that anyone's gotten, I think. And it is a well-oiled machine in there now.
Yeah. You want to talk about video production a bit?
Yeah. You're doing a lot of video for the lab. And my big question there is the writing for like how much writing is part of the video process for you?
Yeah. So just to I do at least two videos a week for the MaxSparky Labs. So I really want the members to open their inbox and say, and then they're usually somewhere between 3 and 10-minute long videos of describing something. Like there's a new version of Moom. So I think it's like a 6-minute video on that they'll get. Actually, they'll get a few days after the show posts. But so I have this constant diet of interesting stuff to people that are interested in Apple and technology going out to them. And then each field guide is around 100 videos. So I actually make a lot of videos, and I'm right now actively trying to expand my public YouTube footprint. So that's another form of videos. Those, to me, they work similar to blog posts, but there are differences. Like I have the idea capture exactly like I do there. When I decide, this is what I want to do, it almost always has an outline attached to it. Whether that outline is done in MindNode or sometimes directly in Notion, it just kind of depends on where I'm at, what I'm feeling. But once I get a thorough outline done, I go straight to ScreenFlow. I don't script the videos that I make. And sometimes to JF's, frustration, it means that I go down tangents and stuff during the videos, but that's just me. And I think people who like my videos kind of get it, and sometimes the tangents are kind of fun and it makes learning more fun. So I'm okay with being a little nonlinear when I record, but I find that the times I've experimented with scripting them is I'm just not good enough at reading scripts and sounding entertaining. It sounds too wooden to me, and I just don't like the way I sound. So I do them more extemporaneously, but with outlines. So there's a bunch of work that goes into before I hit the record button. The other secret I have with screencasting that I often don't share with people is once I get an acceptable read of it, I delete the whole thing and I go back and record it one more time. So almost never do I use the first take. It takes me a while to kind of get it going because I'm not scripting it. I feel like just kind of work out the kinks for a while. I rehearse it and stuff. But once I'm done, I get the recording done. And that's where it gets similar to the stuff I do with a blog post is where the reason I actually hired JF is he is an outstanding video editor and probably one of the best screen flow editors in the world. I mean, the guy is just really fast, and when he does an edit, it looks better than when I do the edit, you know? So once I get it all kind of like done, I do the rough edit. Like, he doesn't need to watch me try 3 times to say a sentence right. You know, I take out all the obvious problems,
Mm-hmm.
and then I zip it up and I send it to him as a compressed file, and then it shows up in Notion on his list, and you know, then he's got work to do, and we have a shared Dropbox folder, and he can download the compressed file and make the changes. And whether it's something for the labs or something for a field guide, he's got the keys to those kingdoms to finish it and get it into the system. And that's where it's very helpful to have someone do that, because that again allows me to go back to focusing on developing ideas, you know, outlining and making new content.
Mm-hmm.
And the amount of time I spend after I finish the edit before I brought JF on, in order, because like, for instance, for the labs, you need to not only do the edit, but then you need to do the fine edit. Then you need to add the heads and the tails to the video. You need to render the video. You need to upload it to YouTube as unlisted. You need to get the links out. You need to create memberful, a newsletter on it, and the blog and the website. You need to create a memberful only blog post on it. Like, that adds up to hours doing that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah,
And,
definitely.
And paying someone to do that then means, like, rather than me do that, then I can start thinking about, well, what's the next cool video I can make? And so that the whole system has been kind of optimized for me to make stuff and him to do the admin and the edit at the end. And I don't want to underplay it, because I think his edits are artful, and better than mine. But, you know, the art that I'm responsible for is coming up with the ideas and making the videos. So we've got a similar workflow to the writing workflow. And it just happens that, you know, I'm working with somebody who is both a skilled editor of words and video. I mean, if he couldn't do it anymore, I'd probably have to have 2 different people for those jobs.
Yeah, I feel really the same way about Kathy. Kathy is so good at both the production, like kind of nuts and bolts stuff, but is also really creative and talented in a bunch of different ways beyond just kind of the pushing the buttons part of it, like the detail work.
Yeah.
I really value that in her and what she does for us, because it means that a bunch of different type of tasks, like you said, generally maybe go to different people, can be kind of taken care of all at once. And it gives her and it gives JF, a fuller view of what's going on too, which I think is really valuable in, sort of tiny businesses like ours.
Yeah, and he's a good friend, and it gives me an opportunity to pay him more money because he's doing more stuff for me, know? And that's good, right? So it all works out. Like, I was thinking the other day, like, I do the ad recordings for all the ads. I'm like, he could edit those, but like, all that time adds up, doing that stuff, when you're trying to think about the type of business I'm now in, time focused on creating content is the time that actually matters. And the more you can spend doing that, the more and the better it can be. And that's what keeps you alive, So,
yeah.
So I really do think about that quite often.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the sort of the running the business side of it. We talked about how, our team members and our workflows kind of fit into that. This is one thing where you and I greatly differ in terms of our scope, right? Because Relay's got like a couple of dozen people doing stuff, running around, putting shows out and doing things. And it is, it can be really hectic. And we also have the membership program and the Discord with thousands of people in it. Relays, the numbers are big. And for me, the sort of the heart of all of that has been and continues to be Slack. Slack is not perfect. I would argue that Slack is actually pretty stagnant as a set of tools and as a platform. I'm not sure Salesforce has been the best new owner of it, but it continues to excel at what we need it for, which is fine-grained conversation, a bunch of different combinations of people with a lot of flexibility in terms of sharing. And so I can hop on a phone call or upload a PDF or a WAV file or have multiple DMs with different subgroups of people going on at once, and having that be cross-platform and on the web it's not an ideal candidate in terms of like, winning any awards for being software and Apple's platforms, but it definitely gets the job done and it meets our needs really well. And Slack is our office, right? Like if I'm at work, I'm active in Slack because that is the hub of really all things internal at Relay.
Yeah. I mean, everything at Relay is bigger, more money, more people, more activity than my little enterprise, right? That said, I do have a lot of labs members that I want to satisfy. And
yeah.
I also am really serious about these field guides. It's my life's work. I want that catalog to just grow and be better. So I'm serious about it, but because I'm smaller, I have a lot more options. Because I don't find Slack. We tried to use Slack with me and JF, and there's a couple other people that occasionally help out, and they were in on it too. And I just found it just an interruption and something I had to remember to check, and it really never worked. And that was largely my fault because I get focused on things, and I really have a hard time losing focus, which I think is a good thing. Maybe it's a humble brag, right? One of the reasons I'm terrible at social media is I just, like I'm making this video and that's all I care about for maybe the next 5 hours.
Yeah.
And it's just, that's my mindset. And JF is really good at working with me on it because he knows how I get, so he stays out of the way. But what we found the easiest way is, first of all, Notion has a good collaborative message system where we can address each other through messages. And because everything that goes into Notion is its own project page, whether it's a one sentence blog post or a 30-minute long video for a field guide, everything is a separate project. So it's very easy to get immediate feedback on that. And one of the things I've really been trying to do is check that twice a day, which sounds obvious, but days would go by and he'd have questions to me that I didn't answer because, again, I'm bad at focus, or maybe I'm good at it. So like now I have a thing every morning. I clear that anything he asks me in there gets answered within basically 12 hours now.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing we do is we have a weekly scheduled call, and the idea is generally whatever's really important gets addressed in the call. And I find that in a 30 to 60 minute call with him once a week, we solve almost all problems, and we can interact on it. We can talk about it and kind of get immediate feedback. It's just better than emails or notes in Notion. So if he has a specific question on a video or something, I'll absolutely answer it in Notion. But most of the stuff we do is handled on our Monday call. And it's a weekly thing. We tried a couple different things. We don't need to do it twice a week. Once a week is enough. But then again, I'll answer the phone if he calls me with a question, and because it's a small team, that works. I had a similar thing when I was a lawyer. Like my secretary, we had like a standing appointment at 4. And the idea was, don't ask me questions during the day. Just make a list, come in at 4. I will answer them all at once. And that worked better for the way my brain works. And JF and I kind of do the same thing, but I don't know that would work for you because you can't schedule an hour call with each of your hosts every hour, every week or something. It just doesn't work. But for me, it's a very simple process. So we don't use, Discord. We don't use basically anything except Notion for collaboration, and we do talk there. And we have a weekly call, which is a very elegant solution for a small team.
Yeah, the weekly call is huge for us too. Each Monday morning, well, it's Monday morning for me. Mike and Carrie and I have a call and go through all the business of the previous week and anything upcoming in the next week. And yeah, there were definitely times, right, where I need to quit Slack or, be slow to respond to somebody because I have something else going on. And for me, it's always a balance of that. As we get into things we want to improve, that's something I will revisit. But getting on the phone, either, like that time is set on Mondays, right? Same time every Monday. And there are definitely times, like there was an issue recently where it's like, what, we could talk about this in Slack, but it'd be a lot easier and honestly better just to hop on, I think I forget what Slack calls them. They have some cute name for phone calls. Like, let's just hop on a call real quick and just talk this through. And as the longer I have done this, / the older I get, the more I value that sort of interaction with a remote team. it's like this could be 15 minutes in Slack, or it could be 3 minutes on the phone, and it'll be a clearer 3 minutes because you get tone of voice, posturing, and on all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I even I remember at one point you had messaged me and 2 days went by and you're like, hey, I messaged you 2 days ago, dude, at some point, and it's just that is a failing of mine. I'm just not good at it. And so you and I do the same thing with this show. I mentioned earlier, every week we record usually at 10, at 9:30 Pacific. We are on the phone, and that is time spent planning the show and figuring out what we're going to do next. And I find it so useful in making the show better. Even though we both of us independently spend a bunch of time on this show every week, but I feel like that planning call, we call it, is a key to the success of the show.
Yeah. I keep a little kind of running list of things this isn't, sometimes it's important, right? Sometimes hey, this guest is supposed to be on in 2 days and they called and they're sick and they can't do it, right? We have those things come up. But a lot of things that we do, it's hey, I'm thinking about this, or this guest was supposed to be the 3rd week of October. Now they're going to be the 2nd week of October. A lot of this stuff can wait. And so I have batched that stuff as well. And one thing we do for our stand-up, our call on Mondays at Relay, is we actually have a Google document that at the top of the document is the new week. And we actually put in advance what we're going to talk about. And there are times on Tuesday, right? 6 days ahead of time, it's hey, I want to talk to them about this. It's totally low priority, or it's better on the phone. And I will put it in there as just a reminder to myself as a placeholder in the meeting of hey, I've got this or that to talk about. And so that queuing and batching is something that I've come to really understand better the longer I do this.
Yeah, JF and I have a similar thing. Thing is, he's so efficient. I'll put it in there, and then he'll just fix it before we get on the phone together. But it's just really. I find that the human contact part is important, and also, like you said, it gets tone of voice, and you want everybody to get along and understand where each other is coming from. And I think just getting on the phone makes that so much easier. I am actually in a pretty good place now with all these workflows. I'm pretty happy with where I'm at. I'm still obviously looking to optimize a bit, but as much as I whine about Notion, I am so invested in it. Somebody wrote me and said, hey, if Obsidian came out with really good collaboration, would you move out of Notion into it? And I don't think I really could, because we have a system that works now.
Yeah.
And JF has built his automations, and I don't want to turn his life upside down just because I like Obsidian. And I just don't see this stuff changing. I mean, maybe I'm making little tweaks about the tools I use along the way or whatever, but I have been really happy with this. One of the big evolutions for me over the last year has been less reliance on task managers and doing this more of a block schedule based. I'm going to spend this much time on this thing. And if I realize that things are falling behind in one area, then I don't necessarily jump back to task management, but just make blocks longer to make sure it gets done. And as I do increased collaboration, I just find that for me, this works. I think this could have worked for me as a lawyer too. I'm not in that racket anymore, so maybe not, but I really feel like this has been a nice evolution for me where I feel less stressed, but I feel like the stuff is actually getting done more efficiently at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, that's the combination right there, right? That's I think what we all want. For me, in reflecting on this, what I kind of came to realize is I have a bunch of responsibilities across a bunch of different things. And sometimes it can be really unclear, not even on any given moment, but any given day, what the top priority should be. Sometimes it is clear, right? Tuesday mornings before we record MPU, most weeks MPU is the priority, right? I'm going to go over the outline one last time, get my ads recorded, make sure we're all good to go, prep the episode in the CMS. But there are other times, like Thursday and Friday, where I do no recording. I keep Thursday and Friday open. I don't have any regularly repeating scheduled things on Thursday or Friday most of the year. During the St. Jude campaign, Fridays are St. Jude call days, but most of the time those are open. And especially on days like that, or days where there's a fire somewhere, right? Like a host did something we have to go back and clean up or fix, or something has come up in App Store review. I'm trying to help underscore, get something figured out, or it's a launch of a new show or a new project or an app update, right? Where there's unusual production work or publication work to do. That's where I feel like my current system kind of falls down, or at the very least can be easily shaken of like, okay, this new important thing came in that like, how do I evaluate, like, is this something that is going to knock me off my, my list for the day? Is it something that can wait? And I just don't always do a good job at that. I'm better than I used to be. When I was newer at this, it felt like everything was on fire all the time. And sometimes it was, the beginning days of the company were hard. But now, usually, if I'm perfectly honest, very few things are actually on fire. They may be hot, they may be smoldering, but they're not, it's not a burn it down, stop what you're doing, go work on this right now situation. And I'm always on the lookout for ways to evaluate that better, to plan better, to have some elasticity in my schedule and my task list to absorb those things, right? There are times now, this happened just the other day, something big came up with somebody else. They needed something, somebody needed something from me. And I had not set aside the time or energy to deal with it, but it had to get done. And it just like blew up everything else in the days around it. And I don't like that. It's not a good way to run my business. It's not a good way to run my, personal productivity and focus, or it's not good for my creative output. So those are things that I'm always on the lookout for, of ways to improve those things, knowing that I can't fully solve it, knowing that when you operate a company that's got 20 people in it, or just 2 people in it, right? No matter the scale, things will always come up, but managing those things better, being better prepared for them, that is kind of where I am right now. It's not bad. I don't mean to paint a dark picture of my productivity over here, but in thinking about where I am 10 years into this and where I want to be, that's sort of the sore spot.
I have a suggestion.
Okay. Hit me.
Okay. So, I want you to think about going a little analog on this problem. So I know that you carry a field notes as like your daily.
Yeah, it's right here.
The problem with that is that you don't know what page you'll be on next Thursday.
Right.
Right. So what you need is a system where you can write things down and reliably see it next Thursday. There's a couple ways to do this. One is the Ugamonk analog cards, which are just amazing little cards. But the idea is it's one card per day. So you could, at the beginning of the month, fill out a month's worth of cards. And you're like, oh, yeah, next Thursday, I really need to make sure that I handle that host thing. And you just write it down on the card. And then you put it in order. And next Thursday, it pops up. I get that you could do this with reminders. I get, there's a ton of digital apps for this. But I do think there's something about the analog commitment, and you have it physically on your desk. Another way you could do it, I just sent you a picture of my week page for this week.
Yeah.
Where you can just see, I've just listed out. I don't think there's any secrets in here. You guys, you can go ahead and just link this. But like in the first column is the appointments I've got each day. In the second column are the blocks I want to do each day. And the third column are the tasks I want to do each day. And I made this page like 3 weeks ago. And so I've just been adding to it as things come up. And so each day I start just looking at that page. We're recording this on Wednesday. We're recording this on Tuesday. So you can see I already did the labs content. I've done the labs admin. I've set a block. So I put an arrow next to it. I'm going to do Loom videos. I put a arrow next to it. So that stuff has all been accounted for. And just having a little system like that you can rely on. But like if you flip the page here, I've also got one for next week that's got stuff on it already, and that is it's just kind of a useful thing to have on your desk. And when you talk about making sure I get the big 3, you put it on there, and you know what the big 3 is for next week or the week after. And I do, this is all in pencil, by the way, because I do erase things, and like you can see, in fact, if you look at my little image, it said 7:30 focused for today, but it's got moved to 1700 because our guest is in Australia. So like I erased something and rewrote it somewhere else. So It's very ugly handwriting. Now that I've said, I'm sure I'm kind of embarrassed by it. But the
It's better than mine, man.
and then like I always like to spend most of the day Thursday and Friday making field guide content. So you'll see those days are pretty empty. But Monday through Wednesday I'm really busy with the other stuff, and I just find doing something like this very useful. And you can do it with note cards or you can do it on a piece of paper. But the thing is, you have to have a designated space for each day.
Yeah.
Another way you could do it maybe is just in your field notes, just write the date on the top of each page. But that probably won't work for you because I know the way you take notes, maybe some days you need more than a page. So, but you need a system that you can go to. And I find the analog stuff for this type of problem is better than the digital tools.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's good. And yeah, the three big things thing is, I do think about things that way, right? Like, okay, if nothing else happens, these are the important ones, right?
Yeah.
Or said another way, these are the ones that need the most amount of focus or attention this day, right? Sometimes those are deadline related, like, hey, we're recording this on Tuesday. I got to finish this book by this guest, right? Or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Other times it's not deadline driven, although a lot of my work is deadline driven, as I know yours is, either a deadline in terms of publishing schedule or expectations that have been set. Like you said, you try to get this many number of videos out each week, or the newsletter generally goes out this week of the month, right? Those are deadlines in a way. And a lot of my work revolves around that. I don't think that's changeable. And I don't mind that. Like I'm not a person who gets freaked out by deadlines, right? It's just part of what I do. And so it's fine. But yeah, I'm going to play with some analog tools. I kind of had a feeling in thinking about this over the last couple of weeks, working on this outline. It's like, you know what? Having it all on Todoist is good, but I kind of want a superstructure like above and around that. And analog sounds like the way to go.
Well, it works for me. And, and like I am all in with digital stuff and I like it. I would call myself more of a hybrid person than an analog person. But I do find just this thing of writing it down and having it physically on your desk helps. You've probably heard the "eat your frog" thing. Have you ever heard that saying before? It was a Mark Twain thing where he said the first thing you do is you eat a live frog and your day only gets better. And then some guy turned that into a book, Brian Tracy, and basically saying you take the hardest thing and you do it first, and then your day's always a win. This is kind of like that, I guess, but it's really not that. It's just a list of the blocks I want to do each day. If there's some specific tasks I need to do and what my engagements are that day, and I can see it and I can plan forward. Like if I go and like I say, I make these pages for each week in the next month. And then as someone says, next Thursday, can we do that? And I know my calendar is listed, but my blocks, it's hard to digitally kind of represent everything at once. And this is where all the note plan people are going to start writing me emails. But you can, you just get away, whether it's digital or analog, to kind of see what your commitments are, not only with like engagements, but also blocks and tasks each day. And then you can just kind of plan into it. And then I think it feels less stressful. The problem you described earlier about, well, we had this thing with a guy and the guy didn't get what he needed. And that's like, you can't plan for that.
Yeah.
On those days, you just do your best.
Yeah. It just feels like a lot of days are like that, right? And and again, part of the deal, right, with the size of things are now. But it is something that I think everyone feels, right? Like I felt this when I was a project manager at a web design firm, right? Like, oh, I've got this and this client meeting today, but then this other thing comes like crashing in like an asteroid, right? I'm the dinosaur looking up at the sky as it comes screeching towards me. And sometimes that's how it is, but it doesn't always have to be that way.
Towards the end of my life, when I was like being both a lawyer and MacSparky, I would like wake up every day and say, so who am I going to disappoint today? That was like a regular thought in my head because there physically wasn't enough time to do it all. And I have not had that thought since, simplifying my life. And that's a good thing, but that's what gave me kind of the space to come up with these ideas of like making it more list-based and block-based and just making your life more enjoyable.
Well, there we go. Software, philosophy,
That got hippie at the end.
You did.
Yeah.
That was good.
But yeah, give the analog stuff a try. The analog cards are also really good too, the Ugmonk stuff. And,
Yeah.
I could see you digging those because like they're really nice quality paper and it's like on your desk and just rip open a card and go to work. Okay. Well, there we go, gang. Let us know your workflows. If there's apps you really rely on, you think we missed one that we should have covered. We have a forum for that. We'd love to see it. I love to see when people come up with ideas in the forums that send me off on a whole new rabbit chase. We are the Mac Power Users. You can find us over at relay.fm/MPU. If you want to be a more Power User subscriber, we'd really appreciate it. It helps us keep the lights on. You can learn about it all there. Get the ad-free extended version of the show. Also, thank you to Squarespace and SaneBox for supporting the show. We really appreciate that. And we'll see you next time.